Welcome to this, our very first video in our series entitled Drupal Community, which in this case means we're focusing strictly on the Drupal site, beginning of course with the home page, moving on to some discussion about the software requirements of Drupal. But do keep in mind that what your site may need is going to depend very much upon what you add into it. Then we're going to move on to the security team area, looking at some of the more recent advisories about cores and contributed modules, and emphasis on how you get notifications about those critical updates. We're going to do a tour of an actual project homepage, in this case views, looking at some of the sustainability factors you should key in on choosing which ones you use within an install. How many maintainers are there? How many open bug reports are there or issues? How responsive are those maintainers to those bug reports and other vital statistics? We're now looking at the home page for the Drupal site itself. Like any install, when you are logged in, things will vary slightly, but in this case, not very much. The main thing I want to bring to your attention, because much of this I think is self-explanatory as to what is here, is this bottom section where it talks about how many active installs of Drupal there are in the world with so many different languages, and this particular graphic here, which is a live feedback of what others are doing on the Drupal site right now as I'm recording this. There is a very detailed installation guide on using Drupal on the site, which you can see is so important. It has a tab of its own in the documentation page. But we're going to focus in here on the system requirements page and talk a little bit about what you see here, which as you can see is pretty minimal what you need insofar as running Drupal on a web server. Keep in mind, as I've said before, that this is going to change very much depending upon what version of Drupal you're using, which I hope would be 7, and other things that you've added into it. Over here is a summary of some of the more recent security advisories that have been issued, those organized by the core of Drupal itself or contributed projects or modules as they're known also. In addition, I want to call attention to this section which details all the methods that this team uses to notify people about these critical updates, including what I suggest is registration on the site and subscription by email to the notices. This is the project homepage for the Views module. I tend to use both project and module interchangeably in these videos. There's a wealth of information summarized here, and it might be quite overwhelming at the first view. So let's get started looking here at the top. This is going to begin with explaining what this module is to do for you within a Drupal install. Over here you could see the list of maintainers. Unlike most projects, there are quite a few for views, but you can also see how active they are on the site and the number of commits. Scrolling down a bit further, here you could see a list of actually all of the open issues and bug reports, but I wouldn't take those numbers too seriously because, for example, here in the graph for the new issues, you could see that that has actually been dropping significantly over the 2-year period that this graph covers, which indicates to me probably that a number of these reports are duplicates of each other or are related to each other in some way to the same issue. Scrolling down further, you'll see that there is a dependency for this particular module, which is a very important thing to check for. There's other information. For example, they have their own bug squad and other things, links to documentation, videos, and so forth. Down here, you'll see where you can actually download the software itself for the project. And at the very bottom is a lot of information, again, condensed in a small area. It is classified as actively maintained and under active development. And look at this number of reported installs. I am very hesitant about using a project where there's less than 1,000 sites using it on an actual working site, because I worry about, is the maintainer going to actually sustain it into the future? That doesn't mean I wouldn't download it and try it, because it may be a new one, or it may be some other thing where it's split from an old one. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Welcome to this, our second video. We're going to be looking at the resource list that accompanies this tutorial, beginning with an explanation as to why it was created to begin with, and then doing a brief tour of some of the topics in there. Not that I am going to have time to hit on every one, but these are some of those that I will be covering. Why was the resource list created? It was to make the sharing of links easier. I'm going to be talking about tools and definitely links for projects that are going to be used in the prototype, and it just made more sense to organize all of that into shareable PDFs so that it would make it easier for you to click on them. At the same time, I also wanted to include links for the tools within the test server itself. Those will, of course, only work once you have set up and installed your own test server. But that saves you from having to type all that information out. And the other thing, I hit on a few written topics that were important enough that I felt to be covered, but not covered in the video portions of this. And as you can see, some of these are mentioned here. The resource list begins with a clickable index so that you can quickly reach those areas inside of it. And I also begin with a quote taken directly from the Drupal site, which is on how to summarize what Drupal is, in that it is both a CMS as well as a CMF. And I will leave you to read those to understand what those meant by those terms. The next area I want to bring to your attention is the section I'm calling Drupal Speak and Conventions, which is an introduction to a lot of the terminology used in connection with Drupal. Keep in mind, you are going to be interacting with others in the Drupal community, so it's important to use the proper terminology. I have only listed a very few, which is meant to be an introduction to the subject. You will obviously run into others, and you will need to look those up, so I have included a link to the glossary on the website for that reason. I'm actually going to be hitting on two of the segments in the resource list, beginning with the tools section list. And I won't be mentioning everything by name because obviously I expect you to read this. I want to call to your attention the link for downloading XAMPP. Do make sure you're getting the proper version for your OS type. And that as I have no clue what problems you're going to run into, there's a link here to the troubleshooting guide for XAMPP on Drupal with numerous tips on a variety of different operating systems provided by others. I will only be covering the use of one library in the demonstration of building the prototype, which is TinyMCE for the rich text editor. But I did include information on jQuery UI because it is so often requested by so many modules for Drupal. And then the next section, which is probably the longest of the whole resource list, which begins, of course, with just a link to the Drupal site itself and a number of project home pages. Those with a star, such as this one, are those you're going to see me demonstrating as part of these tutorials. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. In this, our third video in this section, we're going to be talking about the site discovery process. a subject of which I hope is certainly familiar to everyone watching this. I will begin with a very brief overview, moving quickly on into discussion on the requirements for the site, talking about its purpose and its content types in the first slide, and then in the second, talking about more of the management perspective on how users will be organized into roles and specific limitations set by the officers. The site discovery process is a series of questions that you ask someone about what their site is to do. What is its purpose? What is the audience? How many users are expected to be using it? And who will be generating the content actually found on the site? And what other sort of restrictions need to be set up insofar as from the management side of things? The purpose of the site is for a community regional site in support of a local nonprofit technology-oriented group. And the stipulation is that anyone may register to use the site from anywhere in the world, but it is intended to cater more to those residing in this region. The content that will be found on the site will consist of the following. There will be member-written blogs with the summaries of those to be echoed to the front page, forum posts organized into boards by subject, and then pages written by the officers themselves, and an event promotional content type that is going to be linked both to a calendar and contain Google Map links for the location information, and showcase those date and topic for those events on every page in the site. Beginning to talk about the management side of things must begin with the premise to limit abuse of volunteers within the organization as much as possible. That is, that the number of the content types coming from unknown parties must be moderated prior to publication. In the same time, severe limitations must be put on all global roles with questions that must be answered in the registration process that will be used in the review process of officers in assignment of roles. No posting of any anonymously generated content will be allowed. Furthermore, images and links are going to be highly limited insofar as what non-members are going to be able to do with those. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In this, our second section, we're going to begin discussion of building our prototype, with the first subject being on tools and organization. I've already started talking about this subject in talking about the resource list, because that is where the links are that you find to download all of these things. If you already have programs to accomplish these tasks, then by all means use what you have. We will be using the XAMPP test server, which is what I recommend people use. Again, make sure you're downloading the one for your OS type, and the latest version of Drupal, and those contributed projects that I'm going to be featuring in the prototype if you want to follow along as we're doing the work, and the library file, the rich text editors. And I also included in the resource list some written advice on the storing of notes, because believe me, you're going to start writing notes about this and that with your future work in Drupal. Next, I want to talk about ideas on download organization. For those of you that have no idea what is meant by the term source editor, I'm providing this very quick look of the index file for Drupal opened up in Notepad. You'll notice that things are in color, which is going to really help you in writing your code. This is a short look at the NetBeans IDE, which I did use extensively in the past, as I had to use it to write the PHP files for all of my page template files. Nowadays I don't use it for that purpose, but I still use it for testing of patches provided by others on the Drupal site, which I do on my test server, so that I can report back to them on their function. One of the things I was rather amazed to to discover when I first began using Drupal. Of course, when the Drupal's core files are extracted to a folder, the folder contains the version number. So keeping track of what version of Drupal was what, it was very easy to do. However, when it comes to the contributed projects, those will always extract to the same folder names. So I couldn't just all dump them all into the same folder, even though, yes, the archives include the version number, but the extracted folders do not. So what I decided to do, and this is also a way of helping me track of when I've installed those updates, is to create a folder including the date of when I started downloading those, and that way it helps keep me organized as to what version is where. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In this, our second video, we're moving into demonstration mode, beginning with the installation of XAMPP on my machine, which is Windows-based. And like many others, I do have to make changes to XAMPP's configuration so as to avoid memory resource issues. That is, where some sort of timeout errors will happen when something is either being saved to the database or some other settings are being updated. This is a very common problem. In my case, it has to do with the fact that I'm not only running Windows 7 and XAMPP, but also my video recording software, all of which are competing for the same amount of memory at the same time. One of the corrective actions I need to take to resolve that is to change the configuration file for the MySQL service. I will also be removing what I call dead time space from these videos. That is, when I'm waiting for something to save to the server or database. Keep in mind that XAMPP is actually updated as changes are authorized for different aspects of it. So I will be installing what is the more recent one that I've downloaded, and I will install it in English, of course. And of course, this is one of the first warnings coming from Windows about the fact that I have deactivated the user account control. And then I finally get to the setup screen of XAMPP. And I'm just going to leave all these checked. And I'm also going to leave it at the default, which is for the root directory of the C drive, and tell it to install. Okay, XAMPP has finally finished installing, so we click Finish, and then the next question it asks is, do we want to start the control panel? We're going to say no to that because we need to make our changes to XAMPP setup before we actually start it. Here we are where XAMPP was installed on my machine in the root directory of XAMPP. And I'm going to be making changes for the MySQL service. And notice it does provide me with a number of different sample configurations. I'm going to grab a copy of the uber-sized one and then go to the bin directory. Now, the my.ini file is the one that is actually loaded when the XAMPP is started. So I'm going to rename this to old, and I'm going to paste in my uber-sized one and rename that to the my.ini. And that's all I need to do to change which configuration for the MySQL service is going to be used when XAMPP is started. Now it's time to turn on the control panel for XAMPP. Depending upon your system, you may need to wait a little bit until that activates, especially that first time. You may even need to boot your machine. I'm going to start the Apache and the MySQL service. I wait till the light turns green, and then I click on the X here to shut this control panel down because it is down here available for me later. The majority of our interactions with XAMPP are going to be done through the web browser itself, just as we are going to be interact with our Drupal install. So I'm going to turn on Mozilla Firefox, which is the browser I recommend people to use. And we are going to go to localhost first to finish the setup for XAMPP. And it will ask us what language we want to finish installing this in. I am choosing English. At this point in time, what you should see on your screen is the welcome message to XAMPP telling you that you have finished installing it successfully. If you check under the security settings, however, you will note that it mentions several items that are unsecure. This is because we have not set up any passwords, which is the next thing you need to do. You'll click here. Now this is for the MySQL access, so I don't need to have a terribly complicated password for that. So I'm going to type that in. Now if this were on a real web server, yes, I would use a complicated password for that as well. And now I'm going to set myself up as a user. Again, I would probably use a little more complicated username and password under normal circumstances. Let me paste my complicated password in there. Now, when I try to go to the security page again, I am prompted for my password, which I've already set up. And now it is telling me everything is secure, so I'm ready to go forward from this point. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. In this, our third video, we're going to be very busy because we're moving on to the topic of installing Drupal, which I am going to be demonstrating the manual method of doing this rather than using any automated scripts. We're going to create our database first, and then create a folder in the XAMPP folders. Copy our Drupal core files over into that newly created folder. Then set up a files folder where it needs to go. Copy and replace the default settings PHP file over to the settings PHP file. Add an additional temp directory, the purpose for which we will not get into until much later in these videos. Copy over the files for all the contributed projects, theme, and direct library files, put them in position. And finally, install Drupal. To reach the PHP My Admin program, you're going to type localhost PHP My Admin, and I have this spelled out for you in the resource list in the address bar, and you'll be asked to log in, typing in root password, and we are going to be creating a new database, which will be Drupal tutorial. Depending upon what programs your hosting service will provide you, you may use this there as well as use this to create your users. But we're doing very simple things here just for the test server. Now we're going to create our directory where all our files are going to go within our test server, which are going to be under the htdocs folder. And we're going to make a new folder, which we're going to call Drupal tutorial. The name that you give this folder is quite important, as this will be the same path that you will use to reach it. Now I'm going to use the snapping feature here in Windows 7. Get the core files for the most recent version of Drupal copied over. With those files copied into place, we're going now under the Drupal tutorial sites directory and then default, and we're going to make a new folder here called files, and then we're going to copy this file and paste it, making a duplicate, renaming it to settings. So this is ready for when we install Drupal. And then under files, I'm going to make my additional directory called temp. Now we're going to jump back up to the sites directory and go under all, which is where you should be putting all of your contributed projects and themes and so forth. Now under the modules folder, I'm going to grab a copy of all of these files, paste them in place. There was a new version of TinyMCE out, so I just had to get that extracted. This is going to be under a new folder, which I'm going to make over here under the sites all, called libraries. And I will copy that over. Last item to get copied is the Omega theme itself, which I'm copying and pasting under Sites All Themes. Now I finally have everything put into position, and I can finally install Drupal. To reach your prototype, and I do recommend you bookmark this or add it to your favorites or whatever within whatever browser you're using, is you type in localhost and the folder name I mentioned, which is so important, which is Drupal tutorial. You should see the installation screen, initial one for Drupal. It's asking me if I want to go with a standard configuration or the minimal. In this case, I'm going with standard because I am going to be using many of items found within that in this prototype. The next question has to do what language I want to install. Please check the Drupal site if you plan on installing Drupal in other languages. The next questions have to do with connecting to our database. This is why you have to have it created first. We're going to use our Drupal tutorial database, our username of root with a password, and I'm not going to get into advanced options and just save and continue. Next, you should see the screen telling you Drupal is being installed. Eventually, you will get to the Configure Site screen, which in this case, I'm going to call the site Drupal 7 Tutorial. Provide my own email address. This is for the super user account, and I would probably use a more complicated one and password, obviously, for a real site, but this is just fine while things are on the test server. Choose your country, which in my case is, of course, the United States. And leave that as and save and continue. And we have finally finished installing Drupal. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. With our install of Drupal complete, I thought a short tour was in order because there's a few things we need to talk about just to clarify things. For example, there's the dashboard, admin menus, people call it different things depending upon who you're talking to, inside Drupal itself. especially the reports section. There are a number of very important reports in here which you will need to monitor both while you're building your prototype and also later on when it gets out to the web server. When you are logged into your Drupal site, especially as a super administrator, you're going to see this dashboard admin menu that runs along the top. This button right here is the one that will always take you to your home page as it exists currently on your website. So as you start adding things and you want to start checking how things are looking, that is how you get to how others are going to be seeing it. But then again, it is going to vary depending upon your login status, very likely. So always keep that in mind. There are reports and things that you can customize about your dashboard. I'm not going to get into that. And we will be exploring a number of these areas in future videos. The one I want to get into now is the reports. One of the most important reports is your status report, which is if there's any sort of error detected with your install or the web server of some sort, will be summarized here. Another report that you will be coming back to quite frequently, as well as one that will be sending you email notifications, is one that informs you about available updates for whatever add-on modules and the Drupal core that you have installed. Keep in mind you can change your settings over here to also be notified about disabled modules and themes. These next reports I'm just going to cover from looking here at the interface because there's nothing in them, of course, right now. This one is your log record about recent sort of errors or other activities that have gone on the site. This will be extremely important once your site gets out onto the web server so that you can tell, because you'll probably turn off the error notifications that are going to be showing to everyone. So the only way you'll be seeing them is here in the log file. The field list is where you can access the stored fields that you have added to content types and so forth, so that you can do whatever it is you wish to do with them. The other errors, for example, top access denied, page not found, I think those are pretty much self-explanatory. Again, those are things you're going to want to pay attention to on whatever frequent base it is that you're doing maintenance and reviews of your site once it gets out to the web. Top search phrases actually comes in useful in your search engine optimization plan for the site, finding out what people are actually looking for on your site. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In this, our 5th video, we're getting into the subject of activating modules within Drupal, which can be really daunting at first because you know in advance that some must be turned on prior to others. But how do you sort that out? Be turned on first. Thankfully, Drupal provides us 2 very good clues to this. Right underneath the listing for each module in that module page, there's a requires line that says that if for that particular module, these other modules must be turned on before that one will work. The second line you look at is the required by line, because that's going to tell you that the one that you're looking at must be turned on prior to those other ones before they're going to work. Taken together, this makes a pretty clear strategy. You go through and you try to get as many of those required by ones turned on first, and then you work on getting the others. It is going to take you probably several passes to go through that module's page list to get them all turned on, because you think of it like that brick, building that brick on the wall. You've got to turn this one on. Depending upon how interdependent they are, you may have a lot of them that you need to turn on. Just be patient and work through it. This also, by the way, is a good way to pick up on if there's modules you need to make one thing work, because it's going to tell you if one of them is missing. always check the README files that go with modules and the project homepage if libraries are needed to make a given module work, and it will provide you with a link to where you go to get it. Here we are in our prototype, which we have just finished installing. And when we click on the modules button, this will give us the list of all of the available ones to us based upon what we have put in our prototype. Let's begin with the core. You'll notice here that you could see where I'm talking about those required by and requires lines. You can start to see where those are starting to appear. It's always best, in my opinion, to start with turning on whatever you want in the core itself. In this case, we're going to want blogs, forum, statistics, and syslog. That's pretty much it for what I'm going to turn on in the core of Drupal. Here is an example. You see how all of these modules need this particular one turned on. So this is obviously one that should be turned on early. And I'm going through and I'm going to find the token module, which is way down here. That is, again, one that's required by a couple of others. So let's save that configuration. See, now it's telling us that it has saved that. And I'm pretty much done with the core, so I'm going to just move on to the others. Now that I have chaos tools turned on, you'll see that a few others are available to me. Like, now the next one that's a required by that I need to turn on is the date API. Note under views here, now I can turn on views because I have chaos tools turned on. So I can activate this, which means on my next turnaround, I could start turning on these. After saving that set, you'll notice I'm getting a warning here from Drupal that I have not yet set up my time zone and so forth properly. So I will, most cases I wait until doing the configuration until after I've got everything turned on that I want to get turned on. But in this case, I will do this immediately. Let me open this in a new tab, and that one. Now under regional settings, I've already pretty much set that the way I want it to be, other than the fact I want to remind them if they have not set their own time zone. And then I'm going to simply save that. Date and time I will change because this is not using US conventions. With those options now set, I can go on and continue to activate modules. I know we're done with core, so I'm going to ignore that, and I'm not even going to use that, so I'm ignoring that. Now under chaos, this is a nice one if I should ever wish to export some of my settings, so I am going to enable that. I'm not, however, going to continue to enable any of these other ones, although they are quite nice. I'm going to leave those for topics that you may want to explore in the future. Now we're going to need to keep working on getting our date area set up right. That one I could turn on now. And I can turn on this one. And I will need this because I'm going to be putting in an end time for the events. I still can't turn that on, but I can turn that on. I'm not going to use that, nor am I going to use that. Now under location, I am going to use this, but I can't turn anything else on there yet. I will be using this. Now, in this area, a lot of these are just singles, so I'm going to be turning them all on. This one, of course, is one I've got to wait because that's an example. I'm actually not going to turn it on, but you'll see me talk about that briefly here in a few minutes. That one, this. And because I've turned on tokens, and of course path was turned on for me automatically, I can turn that on. And this. Now delta, this one I want to turn on under the theming tools, although I'll be talking about the subject much later. And the first one I need to turn on is this. I haven't got those turned on, so I can't turn that on, but I can turn this one on. And under views, I'm going to use this, well, actually all of these. Not that I'll be demonstrating all of them exactly, but they're all sort of interconnected with each other. Well, I guess it's giving me an abbreviated list. Okay, I know I'm done with core. Of course, I'm not going to use that. And I know I'm done now with chaos tools. Okay, now I can turn on calendar. I do want to turn this one on. And I can finally turn on date tools. So that's pretty much everything in the date section now that I want to use turned on. Now under location, because I've turned on the core of location, I can start turning on some of these other ones. The only one I actually want to use is users. Oh, and I do want to use this in a connection with the events. So those are the two that I'm going to turn on. Okay, now there's actually a couple of different ways you can do things when you get into theming. I think I'll leave this subject for a future video. This one I can turn on now, and I have on them. So I think that's it. I think I've got them all turned on. Let me save. Okay. There are a couple of things I want to call to your attention while I'm here on the modules page. Normally, yes, as you could see, I didn't have this on that last one. You could see this is where you get to the update script that you need to run anytime you are do updates for your contributed projects or core or anything. Say you had turned on a module so you could test it out and then later realized it wasn't doing what you wanted it to do, or it just wasn't working out. Simply deactivating it in the list is not getting rid of it. So if you really want to get rid of it completely, you need to click on the uninstall option over here. It's not going to have anything there for me because I'm not uninstalling anything. But then you would click whatever item it is you want to get rid of and tell it to remove it, and you'll have to confirm that. The other thing I want to talk about quickly here is the fact that there are some modules that you do not want to turn on until you actually get them out on a real web server. Some examples of those would be Google Analytics, your XML sitemap, any of those ones that do outreach or do interconnections with search engines, that sort of things, or connect into external services. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In this video, we're going on to the subject of user roles and permissions within Drupal, which I think you should consider as an introduction to it, because this is obviously a topic we will be revisiting as we build our prototype. I am going to start with a best practices overview on how roles should be handled, then move into a demonstration aspect where I show you where the permissions page is at and the roles listing, and give you some ideas for reducing confusion in the handling of those, such as limiting the display of permissions by roles and how you organize the placement of them in the permissions page itself. Some best practices for roles. Keep in mind that the account we're using right now is the user number 1 account or super user, and it should be limited to just updating the site when it gets out there on the web, or in this case, as we're building the prototype, doing your major changes. If you're going to be a contributor to this site, by all means create an additional account and assign it to the roles with the appropriate permissions. Roles within Drupal can define either groupings of people or tasks, plus you can assign users multiple roles, all of which adds up to a very fine degree of control over permissions, but at the same time, it requires a lot of testing to make sure those are accurate. If you do not have a secondary browser put on your machine yet, by all means get one installed so that you can set up a dummy user in your prototype as you're building it, assign it to the role, and then log into the prototype through that secondary browser and check to see if that user can then do what they are supposed to be able to do, but cannot do things that they shouldn't have permission to do. Starting with our home page of our prototype again, this time we're going to click on the People link in the menu. The Permissions page is over here, and I will click here. And now I'm going to add some roles to this prototype. Only one of which I'm going to demonstrate because it's real simple. You just simply type it and add it. And off camera, I will finish adding all of my roles. Okay, now I have added in all of my roles that I want to add, 3 of which are for groupings of people. There's going to be some overlap, obviously, between member and officer, and 1 of which is for a task. These 2 here, which are automatically installed by Drupal, are your global roles. This one being for what you will permit those that are not logged into the site can do, and this one applying to anyone that is logged in. So great care must be taken in what you assign to those 2 roles. If you want to limit your listing of the permissions page, let's go back to the permissions page just so you can get an idea of how complicated that is going to look even at this point. If you want to limit your listing of permissions by role, then all you do is click on the Edit Permissions link next to a given role, and that is going to limit you just to the permissions assigned for that role. Trick I like to employ is to organize my roles. My most permissive role at this point is probably going to be that for the officer. So I'm going to push that up next to the administrator role. Right after that is going to be the editor moderator, and then the member. And now I'm going to save that order. Now when I look at the permissions page, you'll see that the order of things has changed. I have my most permissive one, which is going to be the administrator here. These roles have lowering levels of permission as I go out this way. This helps me to keep track of where I'm going in the permission page as I need to adjust things. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Now we're turning our attention to the user accounts combined with location a little bit, as we need to make some adjustments to meet the stated requirements, beginning with the premise that anyone can register on the site from anywhere in the world. We're going to provide a short policy statement in regards to the use of avatars, those little images that go with all the content. When registering, they are going to be asked to provide certain location information so that will be used as an aid in determining if they live in the region served. This also will be showing in their profile. And we're going to add some questions to the registration form itself that will also be used in the review process of officers in assigning roles. Within our prototype, we're now going to the configuration section. And we're going to start under the People and Accounts section. I'm not making any changes here in this first part. However, I am changing it so that visitors may register. We certainly do want to do an email verification first. We're going to leave that area alone. I could spend a great deal of time talking about personalization. There are a number of add-ons that actually help you to improve this area, one of which is listed in the resource list specifically for the management of the avatars. What I am going to do is provide a copied from here, of our brief little policy statement in regards to what are acceptable avatars. Now down in this section, you can see the templates that the site is going to be using when sending out emails to users under various conditions. I will be notifying people when their accounts have been blocked. Now we're into the user locations. We are going to require that people provide one and only one. And yes, we do want it collected during registration. We're going to not show that collapsed. We do not want to collect street information, so we're going to turn those off, and we're going to also turn this one off because experience has shown people tend to put their street address in that one if it's left enabled. We do, however, want to collect their city, state and province, and postal code, and country. We are not going to ask for coordinates. Now, insofar as the fields we want to actually hide from the display, we obviously don't want them to see these or this. And now we can save our configuration. Those have now been saved. What we're going to do now, we click over here on the Manage Fields. This is where we're going to add our questions that are going to be asked during the registration process. I will only be demonstrating the addition of one such, because this is a form, and I would think that everyone watching this has experience in setting up forms. The name for this one is going to be Past Member, because that is the question we're going to ask them. This is going to be a list type with text, and we want radio buttons. Now we click Save. The next area in this case has to do with our allowed list. Keep in mind that this is requiring key pairs, which you can read more about here, and yes, you can use HTML in what is going to be showing to the user. Copying again from my cheat sheet, stored over here to the side. Save. This is going to be required and on the user registration form. And here is where we are going to put our question itself, which is here. And again, here it is telling me what options are going to be there. And I'm going to save the settings. The last thing I want to do is under Display, because this is where someone would be looking at this information in the profile. I want to change that to Inline and then save that. Keep in mind when you set up these fields that in some cases you can decide to make them private. That is, that they are visible only to officers or whatever those designations you make in the permission list. That's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching. We're now going to turn our attention to tokens, taxonomy, page paths, and titles, beginning with a talk briefly about what they mean, because I'm sure there's a few of you watching that don't know what those terms mean or what they do for you. Then we're going to build our form as it's set in our requirements, and our page path when content is saved, as well as the page title, all of which is going to involve the use of tokens, and in the case of form, taxonomy. What are tokens? If you've ever done any kind of programming where you have to use variables, well, that's one way of thinking of them. They represent data that is stored somewhere else in the database. An excellent example would be the name of the site, which is also often the name of the business or organization. Just think, if you had that manually coded in there and then you had to change that for some reason, what a nightmare that would be. That's where the power of tokens come in, is you store it once in the database and then you reuse it wherever is appropriate anywhere else in your setup for your site. Taxonomy is equally powerful, as it is an organizational or categorization kind of tool. We're going to be using it in connection with our forum boards, which are going to be organized into topics. Let's begin by creating and building our forum, which is going to be under Structure, and then Forums. You'll note that when installed and activated, Drupal did create one for us, but we're going to add a few more. We're going to add a container first that's going to house all of our forums. And we're just calling this Organizational Forum, and repeat that under Description. This is going to be our root, so we want to leave it there, and leave the weight alone. Save. Now I'm going to add a forum, which is going to be called Announcement. And let me pop open my cheat sheet to grab my prepared description, copy and paste that in place. And yes, you note that you can use HTML in these. This is going within our container, and I want this to be at the top of it, so it is going to have a very low weight, which means it's going to be sucked up to the top. Here you can see our forums shaping up. Note I could use the drag and drop interface, but when I'm in there already editing them, it just makes more sense to use weight. Now let's edit the one prepared for us by adding a description. Put it in our container. This one we want it to go down at the very end, so we're going to give it a very high weight. And save. That's as far as I'm going to go with building the forum. Obviously, depending upon what you're doing, you would probably add even more containers and forums. Before we turn our attention very quickly to page paths, let's talk about where taxonomy is normally stored at, which is under Structure, and then Taxonomy. And you'll note that this is where it has our terms for our forum. Now we go to Configuration. Scroll all the way down here to URL aliases and then patterns. The suggestion when Drupal's installed for all content paths is content node title. If you want to know what tokens are available to me, each section you look at under this area, and it tells you what types of tokens you can use in each area. What I'm going to do is modify this down to node title, copy that, and use that also on my page. Now, for blog entry paths, I'm going to call this member blogs, and then for the author, if you want to know where I got that from, I'll take it out and go under Nodes, and there you can see where it is the node author. Oh, and I need a space in there now. Okay, now forums, I want that to start out with forum. Now I'm changing things a bit here, because what I want it to do is include the board name. Now, unlike all other taxonomy terms, which are found under the taxonomy section, the ones for the forum are found under node. So you'll scroll down here to forum, and you'll find this. And then the other thing I want to do is, instead of using the page title, I want to actually use the node number. Now, why is that? Because people are going to be coming in and using this, and very often they're going to be using the same subject lines in their post, which is going to end up being their title, and this is going to create a mess inside the forum if I go with that method of saving my page paths. By going with just numbers, I keep it organized and straight. So I'm going to save this because I'm not going to change any of these other settings down here. Now let's go on to setting up our patterns for our page titles, which is similar, but not exactly the same. This is found under configuration, obviously, and we scroll down here, and you may have noticed it. It's right here. This is the default, which I'm going to leave alone. But for a blog homepage, we want this to say member blogs. For an individual blog entry, however, the page title, which we want, blog, and then the page, the title for the article in question. You can see how I'm building this, so I think I've shown you enough how to work it out. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Now we're turning our attention to the date wizard and calendar because we want to create a custom promotional event content type using the wizard that is going to then be linked to a calendar that is custom view, which we will review briefly as it's created by the wizard and save it for work later. Using the date wizard, which is found under configuration and then date, to create a custom content type such as we are planning to do is quite easy. The first thing we're going to do is give it, now this is the machine readable name, so it must be in lowercase, which we're going to call events, and then we're going to change the label for it to events with a capital. Now I'm not going to worry about the description because that can always be changed later. Now under date, the date field settings, I'm going to change that to our pop-up calendar, and yes for repeating dates, and yes, I do want a calendar for this, and save. The next thing I'm asked is if I want to create the calendar and what that should be called. I'm sticking with the default of calendar and telling it to continue. Now here is my preview in the views interface of this view. It is not yet saved, so I must click here. It's warning me here that it has not yet been saved. So I'm saving it first, and I will continue work on this later. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Another name for this video could be content types housekeeping, because we're going to be doing a lot of adjustments within the settings for content types, beginning with that location collection aspect. We want this to happen inside our event content types, but not in any of the others. We do want to add an image field to our forum posts, and then within all of them we need to look at the publishing options and proper menu activation, turn on or off the display of the author information, and also check the commenting settings, whether that should be turned on or turned off. I'm actually only going to display what needs to be done within 2 of the content types, which are found under Structure and then Content Types. I'm going to begin with the Events content type, which we just created in the previous video. You'll remember I didn't make too much of a fuss about the description for the Events content type when it was created, because I knew that I would be able to change it here as I can in the other content types. Under Publishing Options, I am going to turn off the promotion to the front page, but I am going to leave it automatically published. We are not going to display the author and date information, nor are we going to allow commenting. So let's turn that all off and set that down to the minimum. Now, under Location, we do want to collect the location for the events. And no, we do not want to show it collapsed nor allow it to be collapsed. In this case, yes, we are requiring the location name and street address. I'm going to leave that set to allow because not all events will have an additional line for an address, but we are going to collect city, state or province, postal code, and country. The only thing we are not going to collect is the coordinate choosers, and of course the default is going to be United States. I'm going to leave that alone, but I am going to turn off its display in the teaser. The only thing I'm going to be hiding are these. We definitely want to leave the map link in there. So that's it for what we do want the location module to do for us here in this content type. Under menus, now remember, this is going to be automatically linked to a calendar. So I don't know if I would want to link it to any of the menus themselves. I will leave it just for the main menu for now. Off camera, I will set the page title and path settings for this content type as I did with the others. So let's save and say we're finished with this one. The only other things I might want to do is change the display of some of the information. For example, in the date, I want that to be an inline. And in this case, it's using the long format. Let's change that to the medium, and I'm going to leave it at that. Now save that. And as we're not showing, let me check the teaser. Well, in this case, we are going to put that to inline. And that's pretty much it for what I want to do in the teaser fields. So now I'm done with events. It's very similar to what needs to be done in the other one I will demonstrate, which is the forum topic. So I'm not going to get into all of this because other than to say that this one is not going to be automatically published, but it is going to have a revision created. That way, someone will have to come in and decide whether or not it's published. Making the required changes to all of these other content types is very much what's already been demonstrated. So that will be not shown in this video, with the exception being for the location information where you need to block the collection of everything, as well as the display of the location data within both the teaser and full view, and also hide all of the fields from display. That's the majority of the changes I'm going to be talking about with the forum topic, other than one, which is I'm going to be adding the image for those that wish to attach an image file to their post. And yes, that is using the image widget. There's only one choice there. And let's click Save. That is intended to go to the public files, and I'm not going to set up a default image, so I'm just going to save that. I'm going to copy my help text into place. Under our prototype, in the sites directory and under default and then files, I want to make a folder for these images to go into. Now here is where you can get into defining your maximum and minimum. I'm going to leave that alone, and I do want to set it to the thumbnail, and then I'm going to save that. Now I need to make some changes in the display of things. I've already adjusted the forums label to show inline. The other thing I need to do is change the display for the image itself within the body. This is the normal post, and I want that to be just the thumbnail, but I want it linked to, I want it to be show the thumbnail, and I want it linked to the actual file. And then for the teaser, those are fine because I don't want the screenshot of it show it all within the teaser. So that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching. Now we're going to talk about two modules that are quite useful, both the Advanced Help and then the Backup Migrate modules. Keep in mind, maintainers often provide help files in the form of README files that go with their projects. The Advanced Help module is a means of accessing those directly from within Drupal, so you don't have to be popping in and out to look at things that are stored in those directories. These contain, of course, configuration tips and suggestions on how to set things up in certain situations. Your Backup and Migrate module is, of course, useful for making your database backups. One very nice feature of it is that the date and time is included automatically, so you can save your database backup as often as you want without worry of one writing over the other. Because, of course, it's important to make frequent and often database backups because you never know when you're going to have to do a rollback to a previous state of your prototype. Reaching the Advanced Help interface is quite easy, as it adds itself to this bar when installed. So we click here, and here are all of the available README and so forth topics for all the different modules we have installed. Let's open the one for Backup and Migrate. Here you can see it gives you again a description of what the module is to do. It tells you who the maintainer is and how you can reach them, and a number of other valuable information that you probably didn't quite all get from project homepage. The Backup and Migrate module can be found in the Configuration section and under System. And you can make use of some of these advanced features and so forth, which I am not going to get into. What I am going to show you is just how easy it is to make a backup by clicking here, and you see it pops up and it tells me, and then I click there, and my database has been backed up and saved. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. In this section, we're going to be turning our attention to multimedia, beginning with a discussion of terminology. There are a few that might be unfamiliar to you, but I want to hit on them just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'm going to talk about how things were done before the release of HTML5 recommendation, which came out in December of 2012. That is, of course, the way many prod sites are still doing things to this day, and it's not a bad way of doing things. But the impact of this recommendation for HTML5 is profound and ongoing, so you'll hear me talking about this subject quite a bit in future videos. What are multimedia files? Images, or photos, sound, or audio, and video. Another term you'll hear associated with this is media assets. The oldest method is, of course, manually written JavaScript code, where you had to test the user environment, find out what it was they had on that particular machine, hopefully that they had one that would allow you to either display or let them hear whatever it is that you wanted to convey to them. This meant that you had to do a lot of coding and also a lot of testing. After all, there are different versions of those players all out, and that would have to be taken into account in writing your coding. This, in some ways, led directly to the development of specialized media services, which, of course, has been welcomed by everyone because you could store your files there with them and then embed the code within the content of your site. Keep in mind there are still numerous Drupal projects that are sponsored by these services that are intended to interact with their service. The approach I'm showcasing to management of all media assets in these videos is fairly simple. But keep in mind there are many other approaches that one can take. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Now we're going to turn our attention to image support within Drupal, beginning with a discussion on just what is included within the core of Drupal and some of the things that we're adding to it through the use of additional modules. Then we're going to look at what those options were for images that were installed when Drupal was, and how you can modify those if you so wish. Next, we're going to move on to the IMCE module. We're going to be talking actually quite a bit there about profiles that are set up for users in roles that are connected strictly to IMCE so that we can set up who can use it. Keep in mind, one of the stipulation was in our requirements that only members can make use of this, and what sort of limitations we want to set on them. And definitely set it so the editor role can get in there and remove any undesirable pictures if someone should do that. For those of you that have used Drupal 6 and the image cache module, I'm sure you're pleased to know that that is now part of the core of Drupal 7. This means that when you want to set up controls involving scaling or cropping of images that are uploaded through fields, you're going to do all that right there within the core of Drupal 7. IMCE, as I sort of hinted earlier, is intended to work hand in glove with your rich text editors. It is to ensure that the proper coding for those images, normally found on the local server, are set up and provided in the content. Its strength is all of its high degree of control over what roles can do what. For those of you that may be considering allowing people to use images stored elsewhere, there is the media module, which we will be covering in a later video, because it is intended not to just work with local files, but also external services. Again, you can set who can use that and so forth. If you want to know where the presets that were created by Drupal on install, you go to Configuration, and then down to the Media section, and under Image Styles. These are the ones that were created upon install of Drupal. Let me open the one for thumbnail, just so you can see what that looks like. Note this is already warning me that it is already in use, so I need to override if I want whatever changes I would be making to apply to anything else I've done involving this previously. The rule being applied in this case is that whatever size image is being uploaded, a duplicate of it in the 100 by 75 pixel size will be added. If you should want to change those rules, you click on the Override Defaults button, and this tells me now I can get to that first rule and either edit it or add another effect, and then click on Update the Style when you're done. Now we're going to open up the IMCE settings, which again is under Configuration, and then Media. Now this is a little confusing on first view. Up here are two sample profiles that are first provided for you on the install of IMCE. Down here is where you assign what roles get what profile. So the ones that are set up for us under the user 1, those are intended for managers of the site, those that have the editorial privileges. So let's first of all assign that as is to the user 1, and we're going to give that again a very low weight so that they will get that profile automatically. Now I want to clone the sample profile provided, and I'm going to import the settings from that sample profile. All right, here's where you would set up what is the largest file, the size that they could upload. Now, under the directory quota, this is how much space each person is allowed for their images on the server. I would not get too generous with that, even if you have unlimited space on your hosting account. But a setting of 5 megabytes should be more than enough, particularly if those people go through and they periodically clean up old images they're no longer using within content and so forth. I will leave that at 0. I'm not going to make any changes in the permitted file extensions. I'm actually going to set this to 0 because what I'm going to be encouraging users of this site is to automatically create a thumbnail image and have it linked to the original file, just similar as we did with those forum posts. And I'm going to allow them to only upload one file per operation. Now, under directory path, keep in mind this is going to be going under your site's default files setting. So I'm going to have them go under that user images so that then I know that anything stored under that folder will be connected to user account. I am going to give them the option to delete files and to resize them if they should so choose. I'm not going to go ahead create any sort of subdirectories for them because I don't want to encourage them again to have too many files there on I'm going to leave that alone and then just click Save. Now it has saved it, so I go back to IMCE, and you see now I have my new profile that I just created. With that new profile created, now I need to assign it to both the member and officer roles. And I will also add the user 1 profile to the administrator and adjust the weights accordingly. That's pretty much it for our configuration of IMCE for now. We'll get into this more when we talk about the install and use of the rich text editor. Thanks for watching. We're just going to now get started on adding our rich text editor into our Drupal prototype, beginning with the adjustments of the text formats. This is where settings are stored as to what HTML tags can be used, beginning with the filtered HTML, where we want to remove the link and image tag support if those are there, and create another one for the trusted roles and get that customized. Then link our tiny MCE through WYSIWYG, set up our matching profiles to the text formats. The configuration settings for text formats is, of course, found under Configuration and then Content Authoring, Text Format. There are two that were created by Drupal upon install. The filtered format is going to apply to everyone. So let us change that so it does not apply to the administrator, but does apply to those in the visitor role. And we are going to limit the HTML tags, and we are not going to allow links, but we are going to leave that pretty much as is. Now, under the HTML tags themselves, the ones that we want to take out, the HTML tags for this filter are now fine with just that one adjustment because the image tag isn't present. We can save this, and that's now been corrected. Now we're going to create one for the trusted roles. Now this again is not going to apply to either administrator or editor who are going to have the full HTML formats. This is going to be for members and even sponsors. We are going to set limits for HTML, convert the line breaks, and convert those into URLs, and we are going to correct them. I need to move this particular filter up to the top of this list. So you can add more filters, the addition of other modules, such as Pathologic, for checking the proper configuration for links. And now I'm going to also change the length of links down to 35 because I think 72 is just really too long. Now, insofar as the allowable HTML tags, let me get those from my little cheat sheet, which as you could see is a pretty permissive list. but then this is going to be the majority of those creating content on the site. And now I'll save. That's it for the trusted roles format. The only change I need to make for the full HTML is to add the editor in there so that they can use that particular format. And that does it for our text formats. Now it's time to turn our attention to the WYSIWYG profile that is going to match up with our text formats that we just created. And you'll find that here under Configuration and Content Authoring. I'm going to take a moment and stress that what I'm doing here in the prototype is a very simplistic structure. I'm using only one language for everything, and in fact multiple roles assigned to these text formats. In the real world, you might be configuring a site to run in multiple languages. This means you're going to have multiple role settings for each of those languages, multiple text formats for each of those languages, so that then they can be matched up with the editor that is running the proper language, because that is where you make the distinction for what language is showing to a user is here in this configuration, insofar as the editor, that is. Keep that in mind. Another point to keep in mind as go ahead and activate this, there's actually a significant upgrade out right now for TinyMCE, but I cannot take advantage of it yet because WYSIWYG itself has not yet been updated to support it. Now, I'm only going to actually show you how to configure one, which is the one for trusted roles, because I think I can pretty much cover everything you need to know insofar as setting up your editor profile in one. And right here is where you change your interface language for the editor. If you want to disable, which I am going to do this for those in this role, keep in mind this is the one for trusted roles. Now we get into all of our lovely buttons and icons. And this is going to probably take you a while because you sit here and you click and you choose which ones you want to turn on and so forth. It's going to take you a while to get those activated. Now I'm getting down into the plugin area, which is where you're going to have to take your time to read all these links that are under here to decide which ones you want to turn on and off for a given profile. Note here is where you can change your left to right and right to left directionality. Getting down to the bottom of our list, do make sure for your appropriate roles, you're turning on your teaser break and your IMCE support. Moving down under editor appearance. Again, these are where you can make some customization changes based upon what language is being used. Under your cleanup and output, I would advise for the majority of your users that you force the paste from Word plugin function so that if they are pasting things from Word, it will clean up all that junk code. Now under CSS, if you have a busy background or dark colored, you'll probably want to use either the editor default CSS or one that you would create yourself. And I'm going to let you finish up your setup for all of your others as you wish on your own. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Now let's turn our attention to media, beginning with a lot of work off camera in that the creation of a content type that is going to house these, along with the customization of those settings in there and your patterns, and activation of the modules that I'll be using in this demonstration. beginning with the activation of field entity, saving settings, activating media, saving settings, and so on until you can finally turn on Media YouTube and save your settings. Keep in mind I am working with version 1 of Media, which contains the field entity within it. Version 2 of Media, which has some very exciting features, will have the field entity split out into its own project. So by all means, if you plan to use these in your own sites, do monitor the progress on that on the Drupal site, find out where they are, and participate where you can. In the demonstration of what you're going to see me do, I will update the text format for full HTML to include the necessary markup and add a field to that new content type that is going to hold the link to the YouTube videos. Finally, an example content post will be created so that you'll get an idea of how it will look in a site. One of the first things I need to do with text formats is something I forgot to do earlier, is to change the priority of the text formats themselves from the most permissive down to the least, because that way those who have permission to use these more permissive text formats will have them enabled for them automatically upon the creation of content. Under the full HTML text format, I'm adding the convert media tags to markup in case I should want to use this within the rich text editor. Now all we need to do is go to content types, and our new one, we are going to add our new field, which is going to be called YouTube videos, which is going to be a file type, but instead of the generic file, we're going to change to the media selector. Now, save that. Don't worry about this. Let me paste my prepared text in place, and I'm going to say this is a video type, and it's not actually going to be uploading files. We're going to be attaching for YouTube. Let's turn that off and save. Now we need to adjust our display so if things are in the manner desired. Let's just move it up to the top. Save that. Turn off the label, and we want it to be turned to a rendered file. I'm going to choose the large view for this is the node body. And now I'm saving that. In the teaser, which is going to be what's going to show on the front page, and I'm going to put this up at the top. Again, hide that. Turn it again to the rendered file, and this time I will set it to the preview mode, which is going to be a thumbnail image. Take a moment to review my settings to make sure they're the right way, and then hit save. Now let's create our example. I'm going to click on the Add Content, the type we want to create. We're going to just call this sample video, and I'm not going to actually add anything to the body here at all. Select Media, and I'm going to the web. Let me paste my URL in there and submit. And now you can see my preview thumbnail for that media. and let me just save it. And there you can see it's under the desired path. And there is the full large view that I wanted, which you can hit play on to watch the video. On the home page, now there is the thumbnail, which would of course take someone to that page. Another option for working with media, for those of you that would prefer to have your video appear somewhere within the body of your content, is, and I will use the same content piece to demonstrate this. Let's remove that attached video, and let me first paste in some text. We want our video to appear here. We click on the media icon. We get our same interface again. This only works if you've turned on the media support as I showed you in text formats. Let's paste in our code for our video. Now we're asked what format we want it to show in within our node, and we're going to leave it at large and click Submit. And there it is showing us our preview of what it's going to look at. And when I hit Preview, you'll note it's no longer showing in our trimmed version or teaser, but it is showing just fine as desired down in our content. How you manage yours is very much up to how you want things done on your site. Thanks for watching. Now we're moving on to the subject of refining our structure, beginning with blocks. I'll do a very quick overview for those of you that aren't sure what is meant by blocks. Also doing some off-camera work to add dummy content to the site that is going to be obviously useful not only in this video, but in future ones. Then we're going to create a new menu, which will be used in the footer to contain those legal sort of links you typically find on a site about terms of service, privacy statements, and so forth. Then we will look at the blocks page as it is used in the current theme. I will show you how you can see where blocks may go in that template for pages, activate a few of those that have already been created for us, and show you how easy it is to change your block placements from area to area. Then inside the settings for a few of those blocks, I will talk about how you can change the visibility of the block title, how you can limit visibility by pages and/or roles, and where you add the CSS class that you want used for that particular block when it comes to theming. What are blocks? The best verbal description I can make for it is that they are containers for data that is stored in the database or as files. Typical examples would be like your navigation menu, your logo, and lists of various sorts. Another good description for blocks is the mechanism used by Drupal to show content or files to the viewer. Now let's add our new footer menu and toss a few links in there. Menus are, of course, located under Structure, Menus, and we're going to add one, which of course we're calling Footer. Add a short description. I'm going to show only adding one link because this is very easy to do. Now, blocks are, of course, also located under Structure. This is your block overview page. Note that they are arranged by whatever themes it is that you have enabled at the time. And if I click here, I am shown exactly where those block regions are located at in this current theme. Keep in mind this is the default that comes with Drupal, because we're going to get into creating our custom theme in the next section of these videos. Let me activate a few of these ones that are disabled right now. Let's stick them down there for right now. That's our new footer menu, which we want to go down into the footer. Recent blog posts. Do remember, of course, that as you're moving things around and changing things, that you save your configuration as it is at the present. So when we look at the front page of our site, now we could start to see some of those blocks showing up. There's our footer. Notice it's showing the title. So let's go turn that off in the configuration. I just drop in none, and now that will be suppressed. This would be where I would add my CSS class when we get to theming. I'm not going to do any changes insofar as pages or anything else for this particular block, so let's save things. Reload the front page again, and you'll see now that that title is gone. Let's move some things around. Let's put this back over to the first and move active topics underneath of it. Put that in there. Now save again. And I refresh the view for the front page. You'll notice the order and placement of these blocks has changed. Keep in mind your configuration changes are going to carry over between different themes. So get yourself organized as to what you want to go insofar as your configuration. Now I'm here under the settings for the navigation block, and I'm going to actually suppress that on the forum pages. The reasons for that will become more obvious when we get into theming. But now, if I reload the front page of the site, switch to the forums, well, I have to add for the forum too, don't I? But let's open up one of the posts where it should be suppressed right now. See, there is no navigation block there. I'm only going to show you one other configuration setting, which I think is pretty obvious once you get into it. I'm going to change the configuration for the Who's Online block so that this only shows to those that are logged into the site. Click under Roles, Authenticated Users. and save the block. In another browser, I've opened another view to the prototype, one that is showing how things look for someone who is not logged in, that is the public view. And when I scroll down, you'll see that that block is gone. That's it, and thanks for watching. Now we're going to begin working with views, which is an extremely involved subject. This video intending to act as an introduction to it. Off camera, I will have activated the upcoming block that you'll be seeing me work with in the demonstration portions. That will begin with a tour of the views interface, because there are things there that you are going to need to pay attention to regardless of what view it is that you're working with. As an example, we're going to be working with that calendar view that was created for us by the date wizard, adjusting some paths, creating a menu link, then reviewing the filter settings for that upcoming block, and finally adding an RSS feed and attaching it to the other views. How can I best describe views for those of you that are unfamiliar with the project? It is a means of extending the capabilities of Drupal greatly insofar as the display of content. Views has become so important on its own that it is now going to be part of the core of Drupal in Drupal 8. There are numerous projects intending to work with views, because views itself is all about extending that framework within Drupal. I'm only listing 3 here that are mentioned in the resource list, but there are literally dozens of others, with others being added at all times. The best means of studying how a particular module extends the function of views is to set it up on a test server and studying those included views that come with it, usually creating a clone of it and then modifying that until you can fully understand how those settings for that particular module will affect the display of things. Once you're happy with things, then of course you can easily export those and import them into either a working site or something else. Keep in mind there are excellent books and video tutorials and slideshows for advanced studies out there. What you're seeing here is intended to be an introduction to this topic. The location for the views should be fairly obvious by this point. We're going to structure again and down to views. I want to call to your attention that there is an import function provided right here, and even a means of adding one from a template that you perhaps have written your own. There are a number that are available to us from the modules and so forth that we have activated in our prototype, but I'm not going to get into those. Let's open up the one for the calendar view. Here you'll notice the function to add. If we want to add another view to this particular stored one, you'll note these are the options we have available to us right now as to what kind of additions we can make. Do keep in mind that as you add additional modules in, this is going to change. Over here is where you could see we can modify the stored settings for the name and description, and also clone the view, export it, and then we could import it within the listing of views. Down here at the bottom of the view is a preview of how it is looking. In this case, we're looking at the month view provided for us, and it is showing me a preview of how this will look on the site. That's pretty much it for our tour of the views interface. So now let's get into actually working with this view. One of the first things I want to change, quite obviously, I think, is the path setting, which, as you can see, is rather awkwardly worded. So I am going to simply abbreviate that down to calendar, as I want this to be the default view when somebody clicks on the calendar link in our menu. Note here that it is warning me that all of my changes are temporary at this point. After every change, I advise getting used to hitting the Save button. And now it is telling me that those settings have been changed. Under Menu, I'm going to change this to a normal menu entry. Change the wording to Events Calendar. And copy that as the description. And this one I want to actually go into our main menu. And I want to give it a weight of, let's say -3. And then apply. Once again, remember my settings changes are not permanent. I need to click Save. Now, when I click on the Events Calendar link in my menu, I can see my monthly display as desired. As of the time I am recording this video, there is a very important patch for calendar that is being tested. Do check out the issue queue for calendar to see if that has been applied. The last change I want to make in this particular view is I want to add a title for it that is going to apply just to this page, and save that. Now that's stored in Save. And as you can see, it has updated my title that is stored for this particular page as desired, including down here. The next section, which is going to take a little while to talk about, is this block that was included with a calendar called Upcoming. Now, insofar as titles, I want to change this to be Upcoming Events, and this is going to apply strictly to this block. Save that change. Now, if I reload the current page, you'll see my new title. Getting into the settings for this block itself, I'm not going to actually make any changes, but I am going to do a little bit of discussion about fields, filters, and sort criteria. Right now, this is set to use just 2 fields, which is the title and then the date, which, as you can see, are showing right over here. Say, for example, you were to add another field to this content type called topic. That would probably be quite good to add into this block, so you would want to do that through the addition function. Filters. We obviously want to limit this to those that are published, and insofar as the date, that's the other criteria. We want it to start from the present date, whatever that is, into the future. Those are the limitations for what is going to be showing in this block. So it doesn't try to show event listings from a year ago or something like that. And insofar as the sort criteria, it is set for ascending. This is just an example of how these can be customized depending upon how you want your view to work. The last thing I'm going to do here is add a feed. And one of the first things I need to do is set up the path for it, because I cannot save it until I set up the path for this feed. So I'm going to call this calendar feed, and then I can save my changes. And so far as the setup for the feed, I'm not actually going to get into any of that because I'm going to stick with the defaults that are provided. You can obviously do a great deal of customization there. What I am going to do is alter the attachment settings so it is attached to both all of these views, and hit apply, and then save again. And when I reload, my icon indicating the presence of the feed is now showing. That's it, and thanks for watching. Now let's turn our attention to theming, which is indeed another very involved subject, beginning with a reminder about the delay of creating your theme until those content types have all been created and refined, as well as any views that are to go into a site. If you do it too soon, then you just have to repeat the work involved in doing that theme. Nor am I going to spend too much time talking about materials covered in the resource list, either in discussion or in links, on style tiles and wireframes. I do want to remind you, especially with the 960 grid concepts, that we are going to be using the Omega theme, which does things a little bit differently, even though it does rely on the 960 grids. You also must create a unique wireframe for every page that is supposed to look different from the others. And this can also vary depending upon someone's role or their login status. I'm going to show you some of the wireframes I am proposing for this particular prototype, beginning with a little bit of analysis to identify those common elements and where blocks are going to be needed, and how many columns those elements take up in the grid. Here you can see two wireframes, the one on the left being the one for the ordinary content pages, the one on the right being for the front page. I'm not making a distinction at all at this point as to someone's login status, but the headers are color-coded in blue for you, and the footers are in green, and you can see that those are going to be the same from page to page. The only area that is going to be changing in this theme is what is going on in the middle area. Here's a blow-up of one of those wireframes. You can see the pink grid for the 960 much better in the background. The logo block is going to take up two of those columns, the slogan text 4, the upcoming events block 3, and so forth. You'll notice that the login block is also intended to appear before the search block for those that would not be logged into the site. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Now let's shift into active mode, beginning with Delta itself. If you have not previously enabled those modules we're going to be using, by all means get them turned on. And I also want to point out and emphasize the wonderful presentation Joshua did on Omega subtheming that involved not only what we're doing here, but the addition of context. It is a little advanced in it so far as a subject beyond what we're doing here, but it's very exciting in what it can do. So we're not going to be using everything about Delta. What we are focusing in on it is just converting some of those site information items into blocks, meaning the logo, site name, and site slogan. Well, why would we want to do that? That gives us the ability to control their sizing of them within our Omega subtheme, also where they're positioned, all without having to write one line of PHP code, which is something you would have to have done if you use just about any other kind of theming methodology. I'm actually beginning this video over here under the modules list, showing that you definitely want to remember to turn on all of those options for Delta. The Delta Blocks option is found under Configuration and under User Interface. And what we're going to do is toggle these, and that's going to be it insofar as the creation of our blocks. And that's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Now we're going to actually move on to the creation of our theme using Omega. I will begin with some discussion on how a page is divided up in containers within Omega, because there is a very clear point of confusion that can occur there in the naming conventions. Then we're going to use the Omega tools to generate our new subtheme, which is going to be HTML5 based. It will automatically create our directory and those core files we'll need. I will show you where that is in our prototype, as well as where you would put your own CSS and design images. Going back into Drupal itself, in the created page template, I'm going to be turning off the zones we're not going to use, moving regions between zones, setting those regions which are going to contain our blocks, adjusting the column widths of those to match up what is desired in our wireframe. And then off camera, I'll actually be moving those blocks into those regions that are defined. And finally, back in Drupal, we'll be reviewing our theme settings and block placement prior to the addition of any CSS or images. How does Omega break down a page? Well, it begins with the three sections you normally find in web pages. That is your header, your footer, and of course your content area. So that's where the names for the three sections come from. But within each section, you can have a zone. And the zone, of course, can be moved from one section to another. And within each zone, you can have a region. That is where, of course, the blocks are supposed to go. But the thing is, the names can be repeated, that is, for a section, zone, or region. So keeping track of what type of container you are working with is very important. We will finally be clicking on our appearance. What we need to do first is enable Omega. I'm actually using both the core of Omega and then also the starter kit for HTML5. So I'm not setting them as default, but I am enabling both. Now that both of those have been enabled, I can finally click on this link to create my new subtheme. The name is going to be Drupal Tutorial. And yes, we want it to go into the All Theme folder. The base theme is going to be Omega, and we are using the starter kit for HTML5. Adding a description for your theme is, of course, quite important. Say, for example, you do seasonal variations for the site. Differentiating between those will obviously help you know which one should be enabled and when. We can see our new theme, which we are now going to enable and set as its default. Do notice that there is a screen capture here provided by our starter kit that is showing in the interface. Now it is telling me that it is the default theme. When we look under our prototypes directories, you'll note that I'm under Sites, All Themes, because this is where we told it to do it. We now have a folder it created for us for our sub-theme. And when I click here you'll see the logo that it is currently using and that screenshot I was just talking about. When you do your own, you'll obviously want to change that for your own. Check the README file for details on what CSS coding should go where in this folder. Back in our prototype, I have opened one of my wireframes up in another tab, so I can use that for reference on the number of columns each of these areas are going to be using up. And we're going to click under Settings under our newly created subtheme. I could spend a lot of time talking about some of these options in here, but I'm going to try to keep this as simple as I can and let you do some exploring on how all of this works. We are leaving the responsive grid enabled as well as this, and we're going to turn on the scalable support. I'm leaving this all pretty much as is for the time being. Now I am toggling this part off because remember we've done that through delta blocks. But I do want to upload my logo file. And now I'm going to save my settings so those changes take place. You'll note it has not taken me out of this because we've obviously got a lot more work to do. But before we get started on making any changes to our zones and regions, let's look at the site as it is right now. Well, you can see right now that the branding block takes up the whole width of things. There's this user bar area up here, which I'll actually make use of here a little bit in the branding area. I am going to have to resize that logo because it is a bit wider than I thought it was. This is our menu area, which is just fine, but we don't need this header area, but I'm going to steal those regions to use up here in my branding zone. Back over here in our wireframe, let's break down what zones I'm talking about that we're going to need. Remember, we're talking about the header section, which is everything from the system help messages up. But we're only going to need 2 zones because we have this area, which is broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4 regions, and these 2 are both 12 columns wide, so they can go into the same zone and region. So under Zone and Configuration, let's first of all, we're going to turn off the user zone completely by setting that to No Section. I'm stealing the user bar's second region to use in the branding zone. We're going to set it for 3 columns wide, and we want it to load behind all of the others, so let's give it a high weight. Now, in the branding zone, which of course is now going to be loaded first, we don't want to do anything in the configuration area. What we do want to change is our one region they gave us, which is the branding zone. The branding region within the branding zone, we want to set that for 2 columns. And yes, we want this loaded before everything else. Menu zone, we're actually going to leave that just as it is. So we're going to need to turn off the header zone, set that to none. But we're going to steal these two regions to fill out these two areas in our branding zone. The first one we want 1, 2, 3, 4 columns wide. So this is going to be in the branding zone and 4 columns wide. And let's change that to a 3 or so to make sure it comes in after the branding block. And this one we are again changing over to the branding zone. And this one we want to be 3 columns wide. And let's change that to be a 4, so it comes after that one. Now that should do it for our header section. Let's save and look. Here you can see the freshly loaded view of our prototype with a number of things I've done off camera. First, I obviously resized that logo so it fits into the area desired. The other thing is I wanted to explain some of the workarounds that I've had to do here, in that I found that I was getting duplicate logos, so I needed to turn it off in here as well as up in here. So, and save those setting changes. And what I did is create a new block, which I called block for logo, and I have positioned that within the branding region, which is containing my logo image. That way I only have one. If I were to turn on for the menu zone, the menu region, if I were to turn on this main menu block, I would get a duplicate menu in here as well. So this is where some thought needs to be put into things. From here, I think you can go on to handling the creation of your page template, putting your zones where you want them to be, changing your regions around. I do want to call to your attention under your layout configuration for the template, the debugging section, which is where you would turn on and off the display of those pink columns and the other debugging elements. Toggle your libraries, styles, and advanced elements as desired. Once you start putting in your own CSS coding with your color values and so forth, your theme will start looking something on this order. Although this one doesn't have very many graphics in there, it's mainly just CSS at this point. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Our entire focus in this final section is on the migration process, beginning first with your prep work. I have provided within the resource list a checklist for this, but there is a link there to the Drupal site that has much more extended information depending upon your needs. Off camera, I will have reverted the theme back to the default, but I am going to show you how to remove custom logos because that is an important part of the deployment process. Then we'll put the site into maintenance mode, adjust temporary and performance settings so that things will work properly once it is deployed. Under the heading of content and user management, if there were any unwanted dummy and content users, this would be the time they should be removed. I will not actually be doing that in this case for the prototype in question, because you would want to have any of the content that needs to be there when the site is deployed in place by all means, take the time to do a review of those things. Finally, make your fresh backup of the database. Back here in our prototype, you will notice that I have put that logo in place and altered some of the color settings because I want to talk about some of the things that do trip people up when it comes to deployment in connection with themes. If you're making use of the color settings, I would not worry about that. That is something that you do not need to worry about. However, if you have any custom logos or fave icons, remember that when the site actually goes out onto a real web server, the paths for things are going to be changing, so that you need to remove this logo and tell it to go back to using the default. And if you've done it for the fave icon, do the same thing and then save. Once the site is deployed, then you will be going back and checking your theme settings over anyway, so don't worry about this not looking exactly as desired at this point. Putting the site into maintenance mode is done under configuration and under development. You can, of course, customize the maintenance mode message that is provided to users here, and yes, this does support HTML. Once you've put the site into maintenance mode, you will be seeing reminders up here as you move through things that it is in maintenance mode. We're going back to configuration. First, under File System for Media, you'll notice that right now this is where the default file systems are at. That's fine. I'm not going to use this aspect of things. By all means, if you're talking about private files, do read the information provided on the Drupal site on that topic. What I do need to change is this one. Remember, we made that temp directory way back when. Under the default sites, default files folder, we made that temp directory. Now I'm going to change simply by copying this and bring that down here and adding the temp folder so that all of my temporary files are now going to go into that location. Next, we're going to adjust the performance settings, which again is under configuration. Performance. Now, you may have heard me read in the resource list about the cache clearing. That is where this is done. By all means, once the site is deployed, I would start using some of these things to improve performance, to cache the files for anonymous users, and depending upon your block setup, use this feature. Set your cache lifetime to the desired setting, as well as your expiration. By all means, compress your CSS and JavaScript files, then save. There is another module mentioned in the resource list called DB Maintenance. That is for performing some of your optimization routines on your tables, which I do recommend that you install and use. As I'm not doing any of the content and user management discussed in the intro, we're going back to our configuration section and making our final database backup. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching. In this, our last video for this entire series, we're focusing entirely on our migration final steps. Beginning with a quick look at FileZilla, which is one of my favorite FTP clients. moving on into that overview of the final steps. Very quickly, I do want to remind you of a number of modules that are listed there in that resource list that I haven't had time to cover in any way in this demonstration that would make very nice additions to most sites. What is an FTP client? Quite simply, it is a means of moving your files from one server, your computer, to another one that's out there on the web. It should be easy to use, and it would be ideal for it to be available in a number of different operating systems and languages, all of which FileZilla can do. In fact, I only was able to fit a few of their bullet points from their website here into this, as well as one of their screenshots. What are your final steps for your migration? Take the time to do a test install of Drupal there. Why? Some hosting companies that say they support Drupal really don't, so it's best to learn that as soon as possible so you can get your money back from them and then go find a better hosting company. Once you have confirmed that that test install is working well, use whatever tool they provide you for working with the database that goes with that test install to drop the tables inside of it, and import your last saved database from your prototype. Use your FTP client to delete any of the files found under the site's default files and move your files from your prototype into that location. Do the same for all the files and folders found under Sites All. That should mean everything is there, and you can then log into your prototype at its new location now and check the function of it and paths for those image files. Check the resource list if you're not sure how to get to that login screen when it's offline. Change the theme to the desired one, and again, test your site. Activate any of those final modules, many listed just a short time ago. Take the site out of maintenance mode and transition it into your final stage. That's it for this video and the series. Thanks for watching.